Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a Canadian yoga teacher, mother, entrepreneur, and forever student with so many questions. Ask my dad. He's always been one to tell me that I have too many questions sometimes. I'm ready to embrace it. I think everyone around me is as well. I'm also the founder of Pelvic Health Professionals, a place where I get to ask even more questions, where movement educators and healthcare professionals collaborate and learn the most up-to-date information regarding pelvic health. If you'd like to join us, that's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. If you are a fellow yoga teacher, practitioner, or entrepreneur, this podcast was made for you because I get how it feels to be out here in the real world as a yoga teacher running a business. This podcast is a place where you can connect to other yoga teachers, ideas, and information. Today's episode is powered by Offering Tree. I use and love this software in my own business because it automates everything from bookings to payments, Zoom links, reminders, and so much more. We have a special podcast listener discount over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. Now let's get right into today's topic. First of all, it is totally normal to feel less than confident as a yoga teacher. Actually, it's the number one thing yoga teachers have asked for help with. So we used to have a question for yoga teachers when they joined our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group, asking what's the biggest challenge that you're facing right now as a yoga teacher? And over 80% of yoga teachers answered that they wanted to feel or be more confident. So if you are feeling that right now, this podcast is for you and you're not alone. And if you're like, you know what, I'm feeling pretty confident today, then this podcast is here for you the next time that self-doubt or imposter syndrome kicks up, because it really does go in cycles for anyone who is putting themselves out there, and especially if you're trying new things as an entrepreneur. And I think it's healthy when we are putting ourselves into a spot that feels a little uncomfortable or a little scary with regards to, putting new content out there or putting ourselves out there in some way and trying things out. Fairly recently, a yoga teacher shared in our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group that they were dealing with teaching anxiety. And I want to say a huge thank you to Lindsay for being really brave in sharing this question. And then I also want to say a big thanks to Lindsay for giving me permission to share that thread, talk about it here on the podcast, and you may even hear us chat further on a future podcast episode. I also want to say a huge thank you to all of the yoga teachers who shared words of encouragement in that Facebook thread. One teacher especially, shout out to Erin, shared this very detailed list in there with Lindsay. Over and over again, I am thoroughly impressed by the level of support and understanding and compassion that yoga teachers in our Facebook group share with each other. And that's one of those comments where I was like, oh my gosh, look at that. Thank you so much, Erin, for taking the time to share that. Also, again, to Lindsay for putting the conversation out there. This is a really important conversation that we need to continue to have as yoga teachers. And we need to normalize this. We all feel this at some point as entrepreneurs, as yoga teachers, as humans. So I'll make sure to link to this thread. If you want to read all through that, I'll link to it in our show notes. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/326. And if you are like me and you're listening on the go and you don't really want to go over to social media right now and read through all the comments, let me just say I am sharing what has worked for me, what I saw in that thread that I can kind of pull out and put in my own words. Sometimes I'm sharing some direct quotes from that thread when I really love the words used. And I'm also sharing what has worked for the hundreds of yoga teachers that I've mentored and worked with. So I've compiled a list of things. There's 15 things on this list, so I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. Many of these things have helped me through some serious moments of self-doubt. Now, I'm not sure if I've talked about this on the podcast much, but I was super afraid to teach yoga. When I was in my yoga teacher training, I remember what that fear felt like. Now, I loved yoga and the benefits that I felt when I did my own practice. I saw the impact it was having in my life, and I knew that I really wanted to share this with others. That's what kept me going. But I have to tell you, the fear was still really there for me. I once taught a class after I had graduated from my yoga teacher training, where a fellow local yoga teacher, she came as a student, and her feedback to me at the end of the class was, you might want to open your eyes more when you're teaching. Bless her, because no kidding. I was basically, as a new yoga teacher, trying to kind of meditate my way through teaching. And it was kind of like if I closed my eyes, then it was less about me being at the front of this room full of people. So that's one story that illustrates how nervous I was. Another story is that my very first yoga class that I taught was within my yoga teacher training. So it was set up so that we learned for about 6 months, and then everyone started to take turns teaching over the span of the next 6 months. So we, in this yoga teacher training, gathered every month over a whole year, which was nice. We had lots of time to hang out and get to know each other. But still, I was really nervous. I remember the day that our lead instructor said, this is what was going to happen. Everyone was going to teach a full class. And I just knew right in that moment, I was going to volunteer to go first. So I did. I got my hand up in the air quick enough to get chosen to teach first, because I really wanted to get it over with and then just enjoy everyone else's classes. And let me tell you, I planned that class for an entire month, and I wish I was exaggerating. I'm not. And this is why it's really important for me to share this with you. So if you feel like you need notes to teach and your voice is shaky and you're worried about the little details that actually go into leading a yoga class with either 1, 10, or 100 people, I really want you to feel like this podcast episode has got you covered today. So here's what I've learned from going from being so nervous to feeling like I can actually watch the room and walk around and notice how students are doing, open my eyes now, while also sharing a practice that has helped me so much. And at the same time, going with the flow, because a lot of wild and weird things sometimes happen when we're teaching yoga classes. If you've been teaching for a while, you know what I mean. That reminds me of another podcast episode. So if you're like, I'm a new teacher, what could possibly go wrong? We have a kind of a bloopers episode where teachers share the weird, wacky, and wild things that happened while they were teaching. I kind of forgot about that episode, but I'll link to it in the show notes if you feel like you want a good laugh at some of the things that have happened. Now, before I get into this list and today's episode, I first want to tell you about a feature that isn't often known about with regards to Offering Tree. So in case you don't know, Offering Tree is an amazing software company that I love and use for my own business for both the podcast side of things as well as my yoga offerings. So maybe you've already heard about Offering Tree. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you likely have. Or maybe you've never heard of Offering Tree. It doesn't really matter. You can access 3 of their features that I really, really love. One is they do free webinars. Usually they do 1 or 2 a month, and this is offered to yoga teachers and studios. And they're also always looking for ideas. So if you are struggling with something right now, let's say that you want to learn how to set up your website, or you want to learn how to put an email sequence together, let them know, and they are finding experts to teach that to you absolutely for free. Also, they have some really fantastic articles on their website, so that's something I often tell yoga teachers to check into. But most of all, and this is the one that is not talked about enough, They have a Facebook group. I'll link to it in our show notes. And just this week, they shared an Instagram thread telling teachers, like, put your Instagram link in the comments so that you can connect with other yoga teachers. So I love how they're doing things like this. And also, I cannot get over how much help happens from other Offering Tree users in that group. So let's say a yoga teacher posts a question that's kind of tech related, that relates to the software. When that question gets posted in there, it is not always the Offering Tree team that is answering right away. Sometimes, often, I have to say, it's other Offering Tree users that just happen to have a moment during the day, look in there and help you out. It's really fantastic. Now, I'm used to posting like a quick chat or an email when I have a tech question, especially for Offering Tree. That's just what I'm used to doing. But now that I see the help happening in the Facebook group, I know that that's another place I can reach out. Let's say it's on the weekend or it's after hours, and I'm not really expecting to get an answer from the company. I know that I can reach out to the Facebook group. And for a while, I was like, are these people Offering Tree staff or something? And they're not. They're fellow Offering Tree users, and they're really helpful. So you can access that without using Offering Tree. And if you're like, hey, I really want to check Offering Tree out, there is a free trial. And if you decide to sign up, use our discount for podcast listeners over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. Okay, let's get back into today's episode and the list of things that are going to help you to feel like a more confident yoga teacher. So the very first thing is during or right after your yoga teacher training, get out there and teach. Please do not jump back to another yoga teacher training. Don't think that you need 200 more hours, 300 more hours, 1,000 hours. Please start teaching. Also, do not wait until your website is perfect or until you've done, whatever it is that you think that you need to do before you start teaching. Start teaching right now and learn as you go. I know that hesitation. I know all of the things that our brain tells us that we need to get in order before we put ourselves out there and teach. I know the fear, and I know the best thing for that is to jump in and do it. This is number one on the list for a reason. There is no reason that you can't start teaching after you take a 200-hour yoga teacher training. Okay, number 2 is practice. Do your own yoga first without taking any notes. Just really be in the practice. Feel it. Notice as much about your body, your emotions, your mind wandering, and anything else that comes up. Your experience of yoga informs how you show up and share yoga as a teacher. It is a tremendous source of information and ideas, and it is often the fuel that will keep you going as a yoga teacher. Barry Rissman, a yoga teacher and author who has been on the podcast as a guest, said this very well in a quote from a Yoga Journal article. I'll link to the article. It's called The Curious Case of the Overqualified and Underconfident Yoga Teacher. So in that article, Barry says, it's what you do on your mat when no one else is telling you what to do, that you come into relationship with your body, your breath, your mind, that will be your greatest teacher. It's by being a student that we deepen our teaching, a student of our craft, of course, but perhaps more importantly, a student of ourselves. I love, love, love this quote from Barry. Thank you so much. Shout out to Barry of thanks, because she said that I could use it here in this podcast episode. Another note here, when you go to do your own practice, I get that we sometimes want to take notes. So when you're feeling like you want to take notes and you want to plan out your class, okay, fine. Get your notebook out, get it ready, but please have a separate time that is all about your practice and not about writing things down to serve others. Keep these as separate as you can as a yoga teacher. Trust me, if you do this, it will make all the difference in how you can show up for yourself first in your practice and then get ready to go into the other steps of planning your classes and taking notes. Number 3 is teach more. Think of what a toddler is like when they're starting to learn to use a spoon. They're not great at it. There's food all over their face, and that's okay. That's expected. And here are some ideas on how to teach a little bit more so that maybe we're not walking into our first class with food on our face when we're sticking to that analogy. Okay, so start with teaching to yourself first. And this is different from your own yoga practice. So you've got your own yoga practice, which was number 2. So in this one, you're going to do a practice until you're ready to teach it. Then the next step is to record yourself. I like to use audio to start, like you're teaching this. And if you need to do the poses while you teach, that's okay. Then play that audio back and take the class like the student. And notice, what cues feel really great. How's the pace? You can make notes at this time, but it's also great to be in the practice as much as possible to really notice what does it feel like to be the student in this class. Now, I know that some yoga teachers like to use video for this option. They like to watch it back, and if that works for you, amazing. But if your inner critic gets loud when you do that, skip it. Just use the audio. If your inner critic is getting loud with the audio version, look for some compassion. Remember, we're like a toddler learning how to use a spoon. We're not going to be the most confident, most amazing teacher on the planet yet. We need some practice. Also, another tip here is find who you are comfortable teaching. Some people are really comfortable teaching to friends and family first or a small group, and for others, it's total strangers. So once you get comfortable teaching the class for yourself, then try it out with a group that you feel comfortable with. Number 4 is remind yourself of your why. Ask yourself, how does yoga help me? Why do I want to share this with others? And how might this practice help the students that show up to class with me? I love that Sally, a member of the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group, shared a quote in the Facebook thread by Maya Angelou, and I want to read that quote here because I think this really gets to the why of why we teach yoga and kind of puts us out of the way. So the quote is, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Thank you so much, Sally, for sharing this quote. I think it's amazing. And I think it's really important that we need to remind ourselves that we are not there as yoga teachers to teach our students every detail about yoga. They are showing up to be in the actual experience of yoga. And the magic happens when we give them the space to connect to themselves. It's not about dumping a bunch of knowledge into their brain at that point. That's not what yoga students walk out of the room feeling great about. It's about allowing that space for students to connect to themselves. So it's not really about us, which can be very liberating when we're nervous about teaching. Okay. Number 5 is be on time and be prepared. Now, this is coming from a person who loves to be early. So not everyone loves to be early. This is important to me. I like to have my props ready. I like students to know what props we're going to be using. So one thing that I would do in all of my classes when I would teach to groups is that I would get out my mat and all of the props needed so that they could arrive to class and just with one look, they could see what they also needed. I know other yoga teachers that get props out and ready for students ahead of time and have everything ready, and that's another option as well. Number 6 is be okay with taking notes with you. Your students will not mind. Trust me, I took my notes and class plans with me so often. Sometimes I wouldn't even look at them, but it gave me comfort that they were there with me. And I love that in that Facebook thread that I keep mentioning, many yoga teachers said, go ahead, take your notes. Tyla gave me permission to share these words shared in that Facebook thread. Tyla says, I'd say bring your plans on paper. I've been teaching for over 15 years and teach about 100 students a week and teach every single class from paper. My students appreciate it so much. They know I'm intentional and prepared, and it provides me a reset if I go off somewhere. I love this, Tyla. I love that you highlighted so quickly, you know what? I've been teaching for a long time. I teach a lot of people. My students appreciate it, and it helps to keep me on track. I love this so much. Okay, number 7 is do the demos and at the same time, maybe think about what it'd be like to not do the demos and try and get off your mat a bit. So if you need to demo a pose to teach it, it's okay. Especially if you're a new teacher or if you're a bit nervous or if your brain is having trouble coming up with the words, it's okay. Now, if you want to move away from always doing demos of the yoga poses, there are some huge benefits to doing so. We have a really good podcast for you. I'll link to that in the show notes. Francesca Cervero came in and talked about when we want to move away from doing demos all the time. But if you need to do the poses as you go, I totally get that. Do that until you build your confidence. I also want to note here that it's nice to work up to teaching off your mat, being able to walk around the room. I hear from a lot of yoga teachers that they feel more confident when they can walk around the room and look at students. So know what feels good for you. Does it feel like you need to stay on your mat right now? Or can you walk around maybe even for one pose and try it out? All right, we're getting to the halfway point of my list. Number 8, start students in a place where you can find a moment to breathe and center. So maybe students are lying on their back, or maybe they're sitting in meditation with their eyes closed, or maybe they're starting in child's pose. My friend Barb always begins her yoga classes with students lying on their back, like a shavasana at the beginning of class. And this is while students are getting settled into the space. I loved when I first went to her class and saw, oh, this is what everyone else is doing. You can do the same thing with meditation. And once students get to know, or if they just take a look around the room and there are other students doing that, they'll follow suit. They'll follow the example that's there. So they'll get to know, okay, we come into class and we do this thing. And that can give you the time to kind of center yourself and just, connect with your breath and feel a little more grounded. Number 9 is do not be afraid to repeat the exact same class over and over. So lots of students won't even notice when you're repeating the same class. Others will feel really comforted once they get to know the poses or the sequence. And then when you're feeling like you're ready to change the class, try changing just a pose or two in that. You don't have to plan a whole new class every time you teach. My friend Betty, who was on the podcast, I'll link to her episode in the show notes. A lot of you love that podcast episode. It was about making money teaching yoga. She plans her class for the entire week. So she teaches the same type of idea, the same theme. She has the same kind of intention and then similar poses, but then she modifies it kind of for each group that shows up. And some of her students go twice per week, and that's okay. They're fine with it. And it really helps her to, what she's doing is she's batching that class planning time. And then she can confidently teach that the entire week and really settle into that. And I've done the same thing over an 11-week session. So please do not feel like you have to plan an entire new class each time you teach. Number 10 is embrace making mistakes. This is normal for humans, and your students will generally connect more with you when you make a mistake. They'll also learn by your example in terms of how you handle making a mistake. So, if you get really flustered and really worked up about it, that feels different than if you can laugh about it, if you can honor yourself and keep going. So I think that students are, when we mess up with our words and maybe forget a whole side of the body, yeah, it's okay. We all make mistakes as humans, and then they can learn from us and see how we deal with that. Number 11, be okay with silence. You do not have to fill all of the moments of a yoga class with talking. If and when you lose your train of thought, it's okay. Pause, gather your words. Number 12 is don't be a cookie cutter teacher. Don't be saying the same cues as your mentors and your teachers. Really make the practice and the words that you say yours. Use your words, your cues. I remember saying cues that I heard from other yoga teachers in my yoga teacher training, and I just didn't really feel connected to them. Some of them felt very confusing to me, actually. And often those are the cues that just don't land with students. So I learned the hard way to use my own words and find my own style of teaching. And that makes a big difference. You can really show up with confidence when it's you that you're showing up as. It's hard to act like someone else and show up with confidence. Number 13 is remember that everyone who signed up for your yoga class, they're there because they want to do yoga. Danielle, a member of the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group, shared that students want to see us succeed in teaching yoga. I love these words, and it is so true. Number 14 is feedback. I personally don't ask for feedback at the end of a yoga class because I want people to be in their experience. I don't want to be saying to them, hey, how was that class for you? But I understand the need for wanting that feedback. And there are ways to get that feedback. So sometimes that's built into a yoga teacher training. While we're learning to teach, peer yoga teachers maybe share their feedback. You can also do this if you have a yoga teacher friend. Nowadays, we're so used to teaching on Zoom. You could teach someone from the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group who you don't even know that well. You can just say, hey, does anyone in this group want to swap a teaching time? I really want to practice teaching, and then I want to get some feedback. Now, I would suggest setting some ground rules about feedback. So maybe that's, sharing 5 things that you really loved about the practice and then one thing you could improve on. Really set the outline of the feedback and know that this is a time for feedback as well. Another idea is that some yoga studios will gather feedback and testimonials, so that can be another way to get that feedback. Now, if you get some negative, uninvited feedback about your class, remember this is not about everyone. This is one piece of feedback, and it might not be about you. It might be more about the student. So I remember that I was teaching a gentle meditative class, and I had 2 brand new students arrive, and they wanted to join in. And then at the end of the class, they told me that the yoga class wasn't really their style. They were hoping to do an Ashtanga-like class. Now, they didn't tell me that at the beginning. It wouldn't have been helpful if they would have, because that wasn't what I was trained in and that wasn't what I was offering. But they had looked around in our town. There wasn't any class like that. And they just thought, I'm going to try this one with Shannon. Now, if I would have changed my entire style of teaching by the next week of my class, my core group of students who were expecting a restorative, meditative, gentle class, they would have been really thrown off. So yes, I got this piece of feedback, but it really wasn't about the yoga that I felt connected to and wanted to share. So share the yoga that you feel connected to. And sometimes that means letting go of students or referring students to other teachers if that's not the style of yoga that they want. Number 15. Here we are at the very end of our list. When students ask questions, See the value in that. And don't feel like you're a failure when you don't have an answer for them. It's totally okay to say, what a great question. I'm not really sure. Let me look for the answer on that. Or I know nothing about that. That's a really cool question. Especially when it's a super specific question with an answer. So let's say if someone came up to me and said, what's the Sanskrit name for that pose? If you don't know, that's okay. You are not expected to be this walking encyclopedia of every piece of yoga knowledge. You know a lot about yoga, and you'll always be learning. And it's cool to show up excited to learn more, even as the teacher. Now, if a student asks you a question that pertains to their very own experience of the practice, see what it's like to turn that around. So, for example, if a student says to you, where should I be feeling this pose? You can say, oh my gosh, that's such a great question. Where are you feeling this pose? And then encourage all of the students in the room to notice that. So we as yoga teachers, we don't have to have the answers for all bodies and all minds and all humans that walk into our class. Everyone is there having their own unique experience of yoga. I hope this list is helpful for you to feel more confident as a yoga teacher. Like I said, it's here for you because we all have this kind of like dip in feeling confident sometimes as yoga teachers. We might be clipping along really well, and then all of a sudden we decide to write a book about yoga or teach a workshop or lead a yoga teacher training, and we can come right back into that imposter syndrome or self-doubt. So I'm right here with you. All of the show notes for today's episode are over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/326. And if this episode was helpful for you, share it with another yoga teacher, share it on social media, and for sure, leave us a review. You can do that over in the Apple app or iTunes or somewhere. You can definitely do that from our show notes page. So theconnectedyogateacher.com/326. Look for the button. There's a whole bunch of buttons there, but one of them will lead you to leaving a review. We love to read reviews from our listeners. If you are wanting to hang out in real time, we have a guest expert coming in for our pelvic health professionals members, and you can join us to listen to this. It's happening June the 6th, 2023 at 12 p.m. Eastern. We're learning from Susan Clinton all about the upper cervical and glottis connections with regards to pelvic health. So we're learning all about how the throat, the neck, and the glottis area of the body is very much connected to the pelvic floor and our pelvic health. It's going to be very cool. I'm really excited about this call. I think this is important information for yoga teachers and anyone with a pelvis. So to check that out, head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com and you can join. You can sign up for a month. You can decide to hang out and learn for the whole month and then leave after the June call. If you are listening and it's beyond June of 2023, not to worry. All of the replays of our guest expert calls are in the member library. Again, that's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Thank you so much to our entire team, Suzanne Crunch and Sinead, and thank you to you, dear listener, for making this podcast possible, for hanging out, for being here right until the end. It means a lot to me. I hope this episode was helpful for you. Today's episode was recorded on the land of the Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga people, and it is very important to me that I continue to learn about this land, the Indigenous people who cared for it in the past and continue to care for it now. And along with this, it's important for me to learn about the history and culture of my own settler and immigrant ancestors. Okay, you know the question that I'm going to ask if you've been listening to the podcast for any length of time. I would like to know, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.